going to go ahead and call to order the Council Bluffs Community School District Board of Directors public hearing on the College View roof repairs project. Let the record show all members of the board are present for the hearing. We will hear a brief presentation on the project and questions from board members, followed by public questions if there are any. Dr. Murillo, I'll turn this over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. LaFurla. At this time, I'm going to ask Mr. Wilson to come and introduce our guests. We want to make sure that we always take care of our buildings, and this is an issue that we've found at College View, and I'm really thankful for Dean's leadership over the project, and I'll let him and his guests walk us through it.
Thank you, Dr. Murillo. As I said in a previous meeting, we did a walkthrough through College View earlier this year in August, and noticed that we had a number of water infiltration areas. So long story short is we got back together with Greg Steeran, who is with BCDM Architects, who was the original architect on the building, to say how can we address this issue. So I'd like to introduce Greg to come up and go through the presentation with you.
Thank you, Dean. As he said, I'm Greg Steeran with BCDM Architects. We were the original architects on the building back in about 2010. Around the August, September timeline, I received a call from Dean kind of asking to have me come out, take a look at the buildings, walk the site. So in doing so, we got up on the roof. There's kind of two levels. Sorry. Oh, and you have a handout of the exact same slideshow in front of you as well. Thank you. And so we went out, walked the building. There's kind of a single-story area and a two-story area. What I'm showing here is kind of lower-level photos that are maybe a little bit more noticeable from ground level. But the condition of this, it's called GFRC. It's a glass reinforced concrete product that was, at the time, a cost-effective kind of substitution for a precast decorative kind of cornice piece to the top of the exterior walls around the entire building. Since probably a couple years after the building was built, that manufacturer, based out of Omaha, went out of business. So as we're going around and looking at the photos on the lower level, and then as well up on the upper level, it seems that material itself has had a failure and began to disintegrate over time. The photos that you're seeing of the brick kind of spalling and that material coming apart seems to be water infiltration just from that particular product failing. So the intent of this project then is to remove all of that failing product and come back in with just a face brick to match the rest of the wall. And I think our solution is to have a similar color, and so, sorry, the kind of scope of this, the yellow around the entire building there, or the majority of the building, is a much simpler profile. It's only about 4 or 5 brick courses high. The green that you're seeing is kind of at the main entrance, that higher volume cupola, and that's a larger profile that's probably more in the 10 to 12 brick high range. And so the scope of this is the entire school around the perimeter, kind of the top of the walls. And so we've kind of shown a photo here of the existing school, as well as a rendering of what this potential solution might look like. Again, on the left there, kind of showing that if we put face brick all the way to the top and we step that out just a little bit, you still get the decorative aspect that you had from that previous product. Kind of gives a little bit of a relief, especially at that center cupola area. That's a kind of a taller piece, as well as there is in order to try to keep this more watertight as well, when we remove the failing product and take brick to the top, we would bring the EPDM roof all the way up and over the brick with a new metal flashing piece to kind of keep that as a complete watertight solution. So you're seeing that a little bit in the 3D rendering there, and it shows up a little bit better on this more zoomed in photo of kind of the south entrance there. So again, on the left is a photo of the existing condition there, and what we would propose is just a light brick to kind of match the aesthetic of what that existing material is. It doesn't match any of the brick that you've got out there now. There's probably four different blends there. If we just go with a light one that doesn't match any of them, try to match what you kind of have as an existing cap. I think it gives a similar aesthetic while fixing the maintenance issue and kind of giving a more secure watertight solution. So, opinion of probable cost. We did go back through and look at the 3 different potential solutions. One, while that manufacturer did go out of business, there are still manufacturers that are making that product. And so, knowing that we probably wouldn't want to replicate what you have as an existing issue, we at least wanted to take the step of saying, if we did go 1-to-1, what does that cost look like? And that was probably in about the $450,000, $460,000 range. And so we went and also looked if we did a precast cap solution, something that's not as ornamental as what you've got here, just a rectangle that just fills that void. And that was probably in the, we were saying probably in the 260 to 280 range, whereas the brick solution is probably your most cost-effective, as well as I think blends in with what your building aesthetic is. So, and then again, we've kind of broken it out in a range here for the cost tiers for the brick solution, thinking that would be in about that $225,000 to $265,000 range. One thing to mention too, as we're taking out the defective product, putting in brick, making this watertight. When we were on site, we did go back and find photography from when the original building was being built. In the photos that we have documented, they do have the through wall flashing on the interior that should have prevented the water from kind of coming in further, even if that material was kind of falling apart. But that is probably just a spot check, right? We weren't on site all day, every day during construction. So one thing, when they would remove this product, we would want to systematically go through and verify that that truly was installed, like we did see in the locations when we were on site.
That was one of the questions I was gonna ask, but I didn't see any flashing on top of the brick to drain any of that water that might have been treated.
Yeah, so we've got EPDM roofing going up and over the wall with the metal flashing, whereas right now it kind of stops just short of, you're kind of relying on the sealant joints of that GFRC product. But you should still, if water does get in that cavity, it should still be going all the way to the bottom and going out. You've got a kind of a protective layer where your insulation and tape and everything are. That cavity, the water should go out and drain at the bottom where there's flashing and weep holes, right? So we would want to have verbiage in the specifications to make sure that we're going through and systematically looking and making sure that was installed correctly.
Is there anywhere we saw any issues with the roof at all? Or is it just this cornice that has issues?
The cornice is really the issue at this point. There was in I think 2014, the original contractor Anderson came out and did some remediation on some things that were not built correctly to begin with. They did some water testing and fixed the problem at that time. And so I think that this should take care of the problems, but again, we'll need to open it up, see, make sure that it's built correctly. There was I think a hail incident at one point as well, that a few years after the school was built that has been, I mean, as you go up, it's patched. That should be fixed, but that may have led to potentially some of the kind of disintegration at some point.
Yes.
The material is deteriorated because of
To the best of our ability in going out and reviewing the site, it seems to be a material defection. It was installed by industry standards, and again, with them having gone out of business a few years after the school was built, it's tough to follow up with them and see what may have been the issue. We have other projects that we've used this on, or similar, you know, that product that have stood the test of time. Yeah.
We have, I mean, very similar building, Carter Lake, built about the same time. Is it a failure too, or do we know that? I'm just curious.
Yes, I think there is not as significant, but there are signs that it is showing some of the same deterioration. Yes.
Mr. Arthur, what we were looking at is kind of a year one and a year two. And so Carter Lake will be something we keep on our scope, but College View is the greatest concern right now.
Thank you very much.
Close this public hearing. Public hearing.
Thank you, Mr. LaFurla. Mr. Wilson's going to rejoin me at the podium, but our track at Kern Middle School is in dire need of replacement, and it is something that we have been waiting until we could have the budget to replace that or to fix. And so Mr. Wilson's going to lay out what those improvements look for us over the summer, if the board will approve. So, Mr. Wilson?
Yes, so we looked at this project, and we've asked HGM to review this for us and see what is available. We want to keep it within a certain budget line, and so that's what they're going to also talk about tonight. So, Jared, are you going to present? So, Jared Olson from HGM.
Good evening. I'm not talking about concrete tonight. So, I'm here talking about the Kern track. Well, there's asphalt. Yeah, it's really switching it up. All right, as Dr. Murillo mentioned, this has been on the radar of the district for many years. Being a middle school and not a high school that has sanctioned events, you know, it does have a little bit more flexibility on timing. However, it is absolutely due. We do plan on doing a full replacement of the track and doing a few other improvements to it. As far as the need, these are pretty representative photos of what the condition is out there. This is really degraded in just 2 years. When we looked at it back just a couple summers ago, it was not nearly this bad. One thing I do want to note that was a positive sign throughout all the reviews over the last few years is while the cracks are getting wider, they aren't separating this way, which lets us know that we have a stable base still. So as far as Dean's comments about looking at cost-effective options on this gives us a little bit of confidence about what we're going to be getting into when we start removing the existing facility. The other thing that really does need to be addressed is the drains that are around the inside of the track. For those that are familiar with tracks, everything drains to the inside like a fishbowl, so you need to get the water back out, and the inside is all at this one common rim elevation. So there's a whole lot of drains along the inside to get the water out, so that it doesn't build up inside there. When these were originally put in, or when maybe the track was redone previously, at some point they started getting really tall, and there are several areas out there that would be what very clearly trip hazards. One of the items that we're going to address is bring those grates up to the correct elevation to smooth everything out so it looks a little bit more regulation. We did look at lots of ways to keep the reconstruction costs down, being as it's not a regulation track for track meets, et cetera. So for instance, with the storm drains, we aren't going to replace the structure. We actually cameraed everything. We looked at what we could reuse that's out there that's in good shape. They were actually all in pretty good condition still. Structurally, they were just a little low. So we're actually going to be able to modify all the boxes to bring new pipes up to the top. We have to relocate one of them on the left side of that photograph there on the west side to get it out from underneath the track. Everything else we should be able to reuse. We really did spend more effort than you would typically have in this project trying to reuse what we could as far as grading as well. So it is going to be a standard length. However, we are going to be non-standard in some of our radiuses so that we could use the existing grading that was out there that appears to be strong and stable. Instead of disturbing it, if this was a regulation track, we would need to be reconfiguring the geometry at well. With this being sitting on top of a hill that's just on a flat spot, you start moving away from the existing track alignment, you're spending quite a bit of money on grading. So we were happy that we could do that. We'll also shorten up the runways on both ends. When these were built back, when they all went in a couple generations ago of students, the runways used to be a lot longer. We're shortening that all up. I'm not going to put back anything we don't need to. And then finally, the ADA access route for this track for the school is actually off of North Avenue. So we do have to replace a small section of sidewalk out there. There is a little concrete because, just had to do a little bit. We are giving the contractors an option to bid that as asphalt. However, since we are going to have an asphalt contractor out here. Being on a hill, that'll be a little bit of a process to get that all to be compliant. One thing I do want to touch on, I try to talk about this at a lot of our meetings, is what the anticipated maintenance lifespan looks like. The asphalt hopefully lasts for 20, 30 years if it all stays in good shape. The rubber coating on top does have a much shorter lifespan. It's typical to replace these every 8 to 10 years. Wickersham was done back in 2015. We didn't get to test how long that lasted because of some vandalism issues, so that got recently replaced. But 8 to 10 years is a pretty safe estimate for when you need to be looking at redoing that top surfacing there. Just for relative price, just redoing the top, and that's it, is around $120,000 in today's money. So just for relative magnitude. We were given a tight budget of $500,000, and we are bumping up against that in our estimate here. We've actually been working with two of contractors who frequently bid this work in the area about cost-saving options available to us, being a non-high school regulation track. And we've incorporated as much of that into it as we could while still getting a stable, good long-term product for you guys. The other costs are on there, design bidding survey, as well as construction administration, the SWIP allowance of $34,000. I don't think we'll get nearly as high as that, with an estimated total cost of about $580,000. We are doing to the public hearing today. We plan on getting bids back in about 5 weeks. We'll be coming back for approval of the construction contract at the second meeting in March. The expectation is the contractors will mobilize in early June. We're looking at about 6 weeks worth of actual work out here if weather cooperates. One thing on the contract completion date, I did put an asterisk on there. No matter how many conversations we have with contractors before the plan is out to bid, and no matter how much rosy picture they paint you about their availability and their schedule, bid day is sometimes a different story. A lot changes. They win jobs they weren't expecting. They lose jobs they were hoping to get. So we are going to be going back to all the contractors about 2 weeks before the bid date to make sure we have bidders, that we're not paying a super high premium to get this thing done on August 4th. If we start getting some warning signs or whatever, we'll be getting back with Dean and staff to talk about options, about pushing it to another summer, maybe doing it late fall, those kind of, just see what our options are so that we're being efficient with the money being spent here. Are there any questions?
I actually do have a couple questions on this one, because I utilize the track quite often in
It
the
has a lot of
summertime.
public
so-
use, actually.
It does.
Yeah,
It has
yeah.
a ton, like,
Yeah.
weekends during the summer, I mean, it is, if you show up after 9, 10 o'clock, it's full up there. With the gate coming in then off of High Street, what are we gonna do? You mentioned like the ADA compliance, like, that's a real tight,
So that
In and
actual
out.
portion is not ADA compliant. The
Right.
actual The wider gate that can open up for vehicle access is the
Okay.
ADA route. We are gonna tie back into that kind of zigzag. We will tie in a sidewalk into that too, so that you can still have access. It just won't be the ADA route.
Okay, and then it'll be a more built-out sidewalk going up to it, right? Because like
Yes.
last summer, it was rocky, pebbly, broken up, yeah.
It's really
But then
butter.
the long,
And then
yes,
This will be, yes, that'll be a new, hard, normal type
Surface.
sidewalk or walking trail. If
Okay.
we do asphalt, it will resemble a trail instead of a sidewalk.
okay, because that had a lot of divots and rivets and,
Yes,
okay.
yep.
Any other questions?
We're not touching any of those. We're redoing a little bit of the pavement at the top to try to blend everything together. But the stairs, honestly, they're pretty solid. Other than being really long and steep.
Mr. Wilson, for the community, would you respond on what funds we're using to pay for these two projects?
Yeah, we'll use our capital project funds, which would either be the PEPAL or the SAVE fund, or a combination of both, but that's what we'll use for it.
This is much needed. I've been asking about this since we renovated the middle schools, and we just didn't have the funds to do the track at the same time. So I'm really excited, and, yeah, we want to be done by August.
Thank you, Jared. And I'm assuming no members of the public have any comments to make on this project. So I'll go ahead and close our public hearing and open the regular, get my papers together here. Open our regular workshop meeting of the Council Bluffs Community School District Board of Directors. Mr. Wilson, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Kazire. Mr. Arthur.
Here.
Ms. Shudek.
Here.
Ms. Myers.
Here.
Mr. Peters.
Here.
Mr. Tripp.
Here.
Mr. LaFurla.
Present. And now please, if you will, join me in a moment of silence followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Next on our agenda is approval of the agenda. Is there a motion?
I move to approve the agenda as presented.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Yeah,
Second.
Oh, you got it.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the agenda? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And the agenda's been approved. Next is approval of the minutes from the work session and regular business meetings of January 24th, 2023. Is there a motion?
We can move to approve the minutes of the work session and the regular business meeting of January 24th, 2023 as presented.
Second. Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion on the minutes? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. And the minutes have been approved. Next is public participation, opportunity for members of the public to address the board on agenda items or other matters of concern. We didn't have anyone request time this evening, so we'll move on to the superintendent's report.
Thank you again, Mr. LaFurla. At this time, I'm going to ask Dr. Matthews to join me at the podium. Really excited this evening to present our winter 22-23 MAP results. Our teachers, administrators, all of those that wrap around our schools have been working really hard, and I'm excited to show that we are really seeing some success, and our students are finding that success. So I'm excited for Dr. Matthews to share with you where we are and the continual increase that we're having and moving that academic needle. So Dr. Matthews, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Murillo. Good evening.
Good evening.
It is my absolute pleasure to share the results of our winter MAP assessment administration with all of you this evening. I'll start by setting the stage again with just that reminder, that MAP overview. I know you've all heard this before, so I'll go through it a little more quickly. MAP is administered 3 times per year in grades K-10 in the areas of reading and math, and then also in 6-10, 3 times per year in the area of science. We do add 5th grade science winter assessment just in anticipation and preparation for ISASP as well. MAP, again, really does provide that roadmap for teachers and administrators to make decisions at the district level, the classroom level, individual teacher level. So very important information for us to make sure we're meeting the needs of our students. And again, we look at overall performance, those proficiency levels, as well as each student's growth. This ties right into our district strategic goal 1, improving academic achievement. So again, as that reminder, we look at those 3 different metrics. We use 3 different data points from MAP to see how we're doing on improving academic achievement. Our goals are by 2024, 80% of students will score in that average, or high band on the MAP math and reading, what I'll refer to as proficiency throughout this presentation. And then we also look at those individual growth targets that are predetermined by NWA MAP based on a student's RIT level and where they should be by the next testing window. So we want to set that goal again of 60% of students meeting their growth targets by 2024. And then because we believe that every student can and will learn, we set the goal of 100% of our students demonstrating some growth as measured by MAP in math and reading. So we will dig right in, starting with our math performance. We were very pleased to see an increase in our overall math proficiency when we looked at fall 2022 to this winter testing window, an increase of 2.1% as a district. That is also notably an all-time high for our winter testing window. When we first began testing, our first testing window in the winter was in 2019, and we were at 50% proficiency. We are now at 60% proficiency. So we've seen nice steady increases, and a 10% gain in that time is just a huge success and just speaks volumes to the work and the effort that the teachers, administrators, and all of those supports have put into this for our students. This line graph does show those math results over time, beginning with that winter 2019 period and then trending all the way to our current winter 2023 data point. Again, just emphasizing those nice steady increases, which is sustainable. We're glad to see that it's been slow and steady. We did notice a little bit of those drops or leveling off after the COVID closures, but recovered very well and have not seen any dips since then. So very pleased with the longitudinal data there. When we look at math proficiency at each grade level, starting with kindergarten on the left and then going all the way to the district average on the far right, we might notice first glance that slight stair-step pattern in kindergarten through 4th and then kind of swinging up again in 5th grade. But there are a lot of celebrations in this data that I really want to talk to you about tonight. The first one being that every elementary grade level, with the exception of kindergarten, which is approaching 80% proficiency, has a higher proficiency this year than they did at this same time last winter. So that's very notable. Our 6th grade is consistent to last year, and then 7th through 9th grades are also up compared to where they were last year. So very excited about that. And then we do notice that 10th grade is down slightly from where they were last winter, but as a cohort, they have maintained their proficiency. So we'll continue to keep an eye on 10th grade. That's an area we're going to look at for supports. But we know that as a cohort, they've maintained that same level of proficiency they had as 9th graders. This helps us to look at that cohort data. So that teal line there is showing how students performed this past fall, laid over their current levels of performance, that purple bar that we just saw. So again, here, this is where you'll see that 2.1% increase on the far right, where the district average is. We're very excited about that overall. Also noticing here the greatest increases that occurred in kindergarten and 2nd grade. We saw over 6% change in proficiency in both of those grade levels. We also notice here we have an increase in all but 2 grade levels, which is very exciting. We notice at 7th and 10th grade, not even a noticeable change. They're pretty flat. And then again, that 10th grade, or at 6th grade, I apologize, we were just over 1% decrease. But again, looking at that cohort, we're continuing to keep an eye on that. But a lot of times we see at 6th grade that drop with that transitional grade. So we're pretty steady there. Overall, very, very positive data when we look at our math performance. So we want to look at the second metric that we use for our strategic goals, and that is on those growth targets. So this is the percentage of students who met their growth targets by grade level in the area of mathematics. This year I did just add that teal line across the 50% because I want to remind everybody that that is the national average for the percentage of students who meet the growth targets because it's norm-based. And so 50% have to be above and 50% below. We get that average right in the middle. We know our stretch goal is 60%, but I did want to draw our eye to the fact that all but one grade level is above that 50%, above that national average in meeting those growth targets, which is a big success. And while 6th grade didn't quite make that, they were at 43% last winter, and they are at 46% this winter. So we're, again, trending in the right direction, still have some work to do, but overall very positive. And then finally, I just need to point out here that our kindergarten through 5th grades have all met or exceeded that 60% growth target goal, and we didn't have any grade levels meeting or exceeding that at this time last year. So we're incredibly proud of that work as well. So then we do still want to make sure we're looking at any growth. So this graph is showing that percentage of students making any growth when we look at fall to winter data. Again, you'll notice that it's more difficult to make that growth at the secondary level. This is not uncommon as those RIT scores increase. That margin narrows, and it's more difficult to sustain those high RIT scores. So it's not uncommon to see that making that growth can be more difficult, but we're continuing to keep our eye on that to see who are the students. Are they sliding back 1 or 2 points? Is it more drastic than that? What do we need to do to make sure that they're trending upward again? So an area to look at there. But again, looking at this compared to where we were a year ago, that's kind of the story of the night. We're trending in the right direction. The teal line shows the growth at each grade level last year, so from fall 2021 to winter 2022. And you'll notice here again, percentages at every grade level are higher this year compared to last year's data. Then we take a look at subgroup proficiency. This is also an area where we've seen some improvement compared to where we were last year in terms of meeting the needs of students. So that first bar here is going to be all students, so our district percentage as a total. And then each bar from there is one of our subgroups. We have ELL, IEP students, and then we go into our race and ethnicity groups: Asian, Black, Hispanic, Native American, multiracial, white, and then finally our low SES. And what's really exciting here is that we are starting to see that gap between our all and each and every one of those subgroups getting smaller. We are closing that gap for each of those when we compare to where we were a year ago. So we're really glad to see that. We do recognize that there's still a larger gap between our ELL students and our IEP subgroups compared to all. Those are areas that, again, we continue to support through the MTSS process, make sure that those students are getting the appropriate services, and we do want to make sure that they're continuing to grow at the expected rate. So we lay that growth target on top of this. This was a huge celebration for us in the fall as well, but this teal line is showing those same subgroups and the percentage of those students in those subgroups who are meeting their growth targets from fall to winter. And we are seeing, again, almost a flat line showing that we have equity in the instruction and the growth of our students, so that students in one subgroup aren't growing at a much quicker rate than students in another. Seeing that leveled out and at that high, almost 60%, is really positive and is showing why we're closing that gap between the proficiency rates as well. So we know we still have some work to do, but again, very pleased that our data is trending in the right direction, and we're very, very proud of everyone's hard work and focus so far. So then we'll get to take a look at reading. And we have a lot to celebrate here as well. Our reading data is just continuing to grow with those celebrations. As a whole, the percentage of students scoring in those top 3 bands increased by 3.37% from fall to winter. And I just wanted to think about that in terms of the number of students' lives we're affecting. So we test just over 6,400 students this past winter. That 3.37% increase represents a change in 217 students who were not proficient in the fall and are now. So it's a really big deal when we see that number and think about what that means for our students. Again, looking at the historical data over time, we are slightly up from when we first started testing in winter 2019. This is where we did see a little bit more of that leveling off and some declines after COVID, but we are rebounding and seeing those data points at the end of this trending in the right direction. So we're feeling very positive and very optimistic about the work that we're doing, that it's making a difference. We're doing the right work for our students, and we're seeing the results of that. Again, just like in math, this is showing the proficiency for each grade level over time. And I want to park here for a little bit and talk about some celebrations as we look at those top 3 bands for reading as well. First, all of our grade levels are over 50% proficient in the area of reading, and 4 of those grade levels are over 60%, as well as our district average, which is great. In 9th grade, this is our highest performing secondary grade level, and that is not common. That is a tough transition grade level. So to see our winter results, see those 9th graders maintaining that, being our top performing secondary, is really exciting. And that's where we've put a lot of our focus and efforts with the work of our consultants this year, both in Algebra 1 and in our ELA. So we're seeing the fruits of that labor as well. Again, when we want to look at the cohort data and how that compares to where we were in the fall, we are laying that teal bar, or the teal line, showing the fall 2022 proficiency compared to those blue bars where we are right now. Very notably, and I know we always talk about this in the fall, we see that drop in 2nd grade that makes everyone really nervous, and we tell you we recover. I want to show you here that we do. You'll see a huge increase there in 2nd grade, so that is a real thing. We know we switched that test format, but it pays off well for us, and they're doing this independently and still being compared to others who may not be. So very exciting there. We did also note that we maintained or increased in all of our grade levels, again, except 7th and 10th grade. And those are 2 grade levels we continue to dig into more deeply. 7th grade scores as a whole are higher than they were last year. But for 10th grade, that is not the case. We did see a little bit of a drop, and that is an area that was identified by both of our high school principals when we talked to them about their data. So we'll talk a little bit more about that too. As far as the students meeting their growth targets in reading, again, I added that line this year just to show that national average at the 50%. What we are seeing here is that we are exceeding our goal of 60% at 1 grade level. It's really great to see kindergarten not only having those high levels of proficiency, but also those students meeting their RIT growth goals at such a high rate, because we know then that they're establishing strong proficiency that will be sustainable, and that will carry them into 1st grade as well, as finishing the 2nd half of this year strong. Another point that we have here is that we currently have 8 grade levels meeting or exceeding that 50% target, or the national average, where last year at this time only 5 grade levels were. So again, work to do, but trending in the right direction. As far as the percentage of students meeting any growth, this looks pretty similar to what we saw in math. 7th and 8th grade do stand out a little bit more here in these areas as a positive, and you'll see that when we look at how they compared to last year as well. So notable increases there in 7th and 8th grade especially. The rest are pretty typical to what we see, but we're excited to be seeing that those students in 7th and 8th grade are making more growth there, again, trending in the right direction. As far as our subgroup data for reading, it is very similar to what we saw in math. Our subgroup data for reading proficiency is also improved compared to what we saw last year. And we did notice here that the gap between each of our race and ethnicity subgroups and our SES subgroup compared to the all students has narrowed. So we're starting to see that those subgroups are looking more in line with what our all is. And that's a good thing to see there as well. Comparing that to those same students who are meeting their growth targets, this is not quite as flat as the line we saw in math, but again, there's celebration there. We have a big increase in the percentage of all students meeting growth, and we are, approaching that 60%. We're getting closer in that direction. And we're also noticing that, across that middle part, with the exception of one subgroup that is a small n, we are seeing that level off too in terms of the percentage of students meeting their growth targets. So that is our highlights for math and reading. We will take a quick look at our science performance as well. And unfortunately, we are down just a bit in science. This is, as a reminder, we only have 6th through 10th grade data to compare from fall to winter. We will show the proficiency for 5th grade as well. We are implementing new science curricular resources in secondary in our 6th through 12th grades this year. And so it's not uncommon to see a little bit of an implementation dip with a new resource as teachers are figuring out how this works, how it aligns to the standards. So we're continuing to monitor that to get their feedback to make those adjustments to our first semester maps for next year, while also thinking forward to what does this mean in terms of second semester. So those are some steps we're taking in science to address this. With that being said, we are seeing really nice proficiency at or above that 60% in nearly every grade level, and that it's pretty even. We're not seeing any one grade level really skewed that we're overly concerned about compared to another. So again, it looks more at what do we need to adjust and make those tweaks with our new resource and our curriculum maps. When we look at that compared to the fall for those 6th through 10th graders who are in there, again, we didn't see any large drops in any one of those grade levels, very small decreases in each of them. Certainly something we'll continue to look at and work on, but that is where we are with our science performance and implementation as well. So we had a really strong start to the first half of the year, and we're seeing positive results of everyone's efforts in terms of student achievement, but we know we have a whole half of a year left, and we have some next steps established to help us to continue. The first of those is engaging in data roundtables with school leaders. Dr. Murillo has given us a wonderful opportunity to sit down with each principal one by one. So school leadership, myself, and Dr. Murillo are really having rich conversations around each school level data, and the principals are drilling down then by teacher, by classroom, by student, and talking through about what does this mean in terms of their school improvement progress, in terms of their action steps, identifying where they need to leverage support for the second semester, if they need to shift supports from one grade level to another, or from one group of students to another. So that has been very helpful, and also in looking at and determining any additional support needed. So requests for additional professional development opportunities. We're looking at do they need help in identifying what those shifts and supports might look like, or rethinking what can those intervention and extension opportunities look like? Should that be push-in versus pull-out? Can we rethink that? So really just being able to engage in that conversation with each leader to determine how to help propel their school to the next level. We are also continuing to focus on implementing that grade level universal instruction. We know that high quality core is what's going to make the biggest change for our students, and we are seeing that. A huge focus this year has been around intentional planning and seeing those teachers really collaborating to make those meaningful learning connections for students. We have our curriculum maps and our resources, but we know it's that art of teaching and it's that instruction that those teachers provide that make it meaningful, make it come to life for students. So helping, just sitting with them, digging in, them sitting together and looking at their lessons and saying, you know, where do I engage them? How do I hook them here? What high quality questions should I be asking? Where do I check for understanding? And then really notably, they're pre-planning for those questions around, what do I do if students don't learn this? And what do I do for the ones who already have? So they have that in their back pocket already before they even deliver the lesson, and they know what adjustments they need to make or how they're going to respond in those situations. And that's been really powerful. So we're continuing to leverage MTSS to identify and respond when universal instruction isn't enough. We're looking at where those supports are needed and even those extension opportunities. That ties right into what they're doing with that intentional planning as well for that first layer of support or extension. And then we do use our data to begin recruiting students for summer learning opportunities, especially at the elementary level. That's an important piece of it, to make sure that we're prioritizing and targeting the right students for those experiences so that we can continue to see these positive results. So that is the exciting work that we've been doing. I'm so proud of all of the school leaders and the teachers for digging in and making this change in students' lives. With that, I would be happy to answer questions.
I do have a question on the science piece. So our groups that were kind of our early our adopters or our first, the first cohorts that were using that new curriculum, what are they seeing in terms of gain? Have we looked at just those? Because I assume that was a few classrooms or a few.
Yes,
Yeah.
we always see a little bit of variance in implementation, and I would say the ones that are in a year or two or have had more experience with the resources are seeing those results.
Okay.
Question.
Any other questions? There's a lot to celebrate in there, so congratulations to you and your team and our principals and most of all our teachers who are
Yeah.
in there every day. And I also want to recognize our students who are really doing the hard work and having to, myself, I know how seriously they take the assessment. Sometimes I just have to tell them, it's not that important. You don't need to work yourself up. But, it's nice to see that it's meaningful to them, to demonstrate their learning. And, I also think it'd be a good idea to thank all of the parents who are supporting all of our kids. And, these are impressive gains, 2-3%. May not sound like a lot, but when you're talking about thousands of kids, it's hard to make those gains in a short time, so you're all doing incredible work.
Thank you, Dr. Matthews. I echo those sentiments, Mr. LaFurla, and couldn't be prouder of especially our teachers who have really leaned in to use the MAP assessment to support our students where they are. And it's exciting, especially our new principals, to come in and have conversation with us and already know their school data and talking about working with teachers. It's really keeping schools and students at the center of our work. And that's why we see those, because of their commitment to moving on and providing our students with what they need, meeting them where they are and moving them. And that's pretty special. Very special, especially coming as we went through the pandemic and we know what we're hearing about other districts. I can definitely tell you that is not the case or the headline for Council Bluffs. So very proud of their work. Our next presentation is our informational presentation, and I'm going to invite Ms. Ostrowski to the podium. I thought it was really important as we've been going through the legislative sessions, and you all have been receiving updates every Friday, but we have some conversation in front of our community and our school community and our community at large. So I've asked Ms. Ostrowski to present kind of around what's kind of been the conversation, what are they focusing on, and then Mr. Wilson's going to kind of add a budget side to it at the end. So Ms. Ostrowski, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Morello. Good evening. Happy Valentine's Day. Here we are together. We are just weeks into the session, but some significant legislation has been passed and some other pending legislation is still in progress. And so tonight, we're just going to hit on a few things that could spark some conversation, but we'll just give you an introduction. First of all, as you know, the state supplemental aid was passed here within the first 30 days of the session, which is the requirement. It isn't always done, but this year it was 3%. And this is above the 10-year average of 2.1%. So while not enough to keep pace with inflation, it is higher than the trend has been over the last decade. The new per pupil funding is $7,635. And this, the increase in SSA really allows us to increase the categorical funding as well, not just in the general fund. One of the things we're keeping our eye on is some possible appropriations discussion on one of this board's priorities, and that is preschool funding. As you know, it's weighted at 0.5% or 0.5 funding at this time. There is discussion about basing on free and reduced lunch qualifications, a weighting of 0.75 or 1.0 for students who fall in that category. I think it's of 200% of the free and reduced lunch poverty level. So that would be one step closer to that full funding. As you know, the Education Reform Act passed very early, very quickly in the session. And therefore, there's kind of several areas of concern and critical elements that we feel should be really considered heavily as they talk about the implementation, right, the rules, and make sure that this rolls out correctly. The first one really is around the late deadline of June 30th that they have set for families to apply for those educational savings accounts. Why is this a concern? Well, you might remember that this past legislative session in 22, they eliminated the open enrollment deadline of March 15th. And what we have learned from that in this short time is that this makes enrollment planning and budgeting more difficult. It's unpredictable. To help counter this unpredictability then, we really hope to have working relationships with our area private schools, Heartland Christian, St. Albert, so that we can obtain enrollment information a little bit more quickly than we might otherwise, and then use that to carefully plan for our staffing. Make sure we have enough kindergarten teachers, for example. That's the area of concern, because if we haven't met the families yet, and they choose to go right into a private school, we may never know that they're not coming. We look at trend data on birth rates 5 years earlier and can fairly closely predict how many students are coming into our district. But with this as an option now, we don't know what the impact's going to be. So again, those working relationships to find out, who we aren't going to see in our schools will be very helpful for us to plan. Again, we want to be staffed accordingly when the school starts, right? Next, we anticipate that some of our students will return to school, to our school district, after initially enrolling in private school. And it will be important for the state to then prorate back to us if those students are counted as private school but return to the public school after that October certified enrollment count, right? So that the money is following the kids back to the public school district, even though the educational savings accounts were allocated initially to the private school. We also want to continue to advocate for private school accountability and transparency as well. And the state, we believe, should require private schools to make available those accreditation standards as well as how they are doing and meeting those accreditation standards. Again, they're using public dollars, so let's hear how you're doing. And then similarly, there's a new proposed House Study Bill 138 that includes a private school testing rollback. So in the initial legislation that was enacted just weeks ago, that required students receiving education savings accounts to participate in mandated state and federal testing. However, this bill, as proposed, would allow parents to opt students out of that. And of course, public school parents are not allowed to opt out. So that's a difference. Again, initially passed in the legislation and now being kind of rolled back in this study bill. A Couple other bills I'll just touch on briefly, because I know that all of you are engaged with reading updates from our partners who are advocating in Des Moines, and Dr. Murillo has kept you up to date with her continuous advocacy with our legislators. But the Senate file and a corresponding or companion House file is about transportation of open enrolled students. Currently, for an open enrolled student to receive transportation from the receiving district, there would have to be an agreement between both districts to do so. It's very rare, under my understanding, that ever occurs. But this would allow a receiving district to drive into the neighboring district, pick up the child, and deliver them to school. We're concerned about the impact of this on the ability to equitably and economically provide this service. And then finally, this one was a little bit of a surprise, and it was approved out of the Senate Education Committee. This would limit a broader category of expenses that a school district would be able to utilize. They want to cap it at 5%. So this is not, anything they're saying is non-instructional would be capped at 5%. And it used to be about executive expenses. Now it's more broad in the term administrative expenses that has not yet been defined. And of note, I think about 300, according to Dan, about 300 of the 329 or so public school districts would exceed this limit at this time. In fact, it's more like the 11 to 17% range. So that's of concern, and what would happen to state funding and whatnot if a district was not in compliance with this. We hope that maybe they'll take some time and study this and determine whether or not a different threshold might be more appropriate. So we are approaching on March 3rd that first time funnel. And basically, if a committee's considering a bill, it has to be passed out of that committee onto the full chamber floor, or and that's either in the Senate or the House, okay, or it dies. And then on the second funnel, which is the last day of March, that is when similarly any committee bills any bills in the Senate need to be passed over to the House to be considered. If they don't pass from one house to another, they die. So that's kind of what we're looking at. It's going to be fast-paced over the next month, 6 weeks, to that second funnel. And so we'll be watching carefully, and I know you'll be watching carefully to see how these bills and others progress. So I'd like to invite my colleague, Dean Wilson, up to dig just a little bit deeper into these in terms of the impact on funding that we're watching. So, Dean? And we decide to answer questions at any time.
Okay, legislative update on funding. I will have to say that this has been the toughest budget year I've encountered in my 10 years here. And we were kind of kidding about it the other day, but it's true that I have been waking up in the middle of the night thinking about this stuff. And I know Dr. Murillo has said the same thing. So that we're very concerned about all these legislative changes that are occurring. Whoops. Diane, what happened here? There we go. So the 3% that we will be getting will equal just shy of about $1.6 million. When we did our original forecast for next year, we used 2.75 or about $1 million, almost $3 million. So this will be receiving about $300,000 more than what we had forecast in our budget. And the 3%, as Diane mentioned earlier, also applies to the categorical funding such as TSS, TQ, things like that. Vouchers. So let's talk briefly about these vouchers. They call them ESAs now because I think that's more of a politically correct term, but they're vouchers. And parents who opted for private education would have an educational savings account established for them where funds would be deposited by the state into the account. And the money can only be used for tuition fees and other things that are statutorily defined. The state is going to hire an outside company to come in and actually manage this. And this is where Diane was talking about money following the student. We don't know if that's going to happen yet. We hope it does. It should, but we don't know if that's going to happen yet. So more to follow on that. Because of all of this, what they came up with is the district will receive each year about $1,205 per pupil in categorical funding for students enrolled. So what they're going to do is instead of just giving us $1,205 per student that you can use for your general whatever, they're tying it to the categorical. So it'll be for TQ and TSS, and all the other kind of stuff. Got a little disappointed in that. Also, for every student who enrolls out, what they do is we get this save money, and that's the penny sales tax money. And right now, it's about $1,000 per pupil. That's the Iowa Department of Revenue allocates that out. So for every student who enrolls out, we're going to lose $1,000 in save money, which is a little troubling as well, because we use that fund to pay back our bonds and to use for other infrastructure type things that we do in the district. This all will commence in the 24-25 year, so this $1,205 won't be for next year. It'll happen in the 24-25 year. So the way this is going to work on these vouchers is that all kindergarten students and all students enrolled in public schools would be eligible for these. However, students enrolled currently in private schools with a household income at or below 300% of the federal poverty guidelines, which is about $90,000 for a family, would be eligible. The year after that, they're going to go to 400%, which would be, in today's dollars, about $120,000 for a family of four. Then in the 25-26 school year, all K-12 students, regardless of income, would be eligible for these vouchers. Excuse me, ESA. Overstepped that. Yeah, vouchers. And again, as I said, we don't know if the money's going to follow the student or not, so hopefully that will be defined in legislation before the session's over with. And so I open this up for discussion among the board. If you have any questions from Diane and I, or Dr. Murillo, of course.
I guess as I understand, the private schools will get their funding in real time. So if they get a student enrolling out of Council Bluffs going to a private school, they get that money immediately, whereas we have to wait a year, was my understanding how
I don't
how
know
they're
that,
going to
Dave.
fund that.
I don't know that. It wouldn't surprise me because they're going to use as I said, a company or a private company to actually manage this. So they may be a lot faster than the state.
And I would probably say, Mr. Kozar, that would be correct, because they wouldn't have the funds
Right.
to hire the additional teachers and staff if they didn't have it in real time, which is another new rule for them versus us.
But we have to do that every year.
That's correct.
So it's, playing the same game, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I don't necessarily know if I have any questions, but I have a few comments. So first of all, I think that this is great that we bring this into the public. Anybody who's watching things of that nature, these bills up in Des Moines affect us greatly in our community and especially in our district. And Ms. Ostrowski, you mentioned it's 3%. It's nowhere close to where we need to be. We should be at 8% in order to stay with the times. And we've been woefully underfunded in the state of Iowa for years and years and years. So I appreciate our district and everything we do to keep us afloat, give opportunities, things of that nature. Second of all, I publicly would like to thank Brent Segrist and Josh Stark for voting against the voucher bill. It's a voucher bill. I don't care what you call it, it's vouchers. And I think that people should know, Dan Dawson and Mark Costello fought hard and voted yes for them. Our elections have real life consequences. And my husband would say I'm a little bit more politically engaged and charged than the most normal person. But that's okay, because it gives us an opportunity to give the basic broad information to the public without having to go into the weeds. So I really appreciate that we've added this. And I would hope that we continue to add as we get through funnel week and next session and things of that nature. So I really appreciate that. And I'll keep the rest of my comments to myself at this point in time. Thanks.
Go ahead, Dave.
Where will that $1,000 that we're losing from SAVE funding go? Will that just stay in the state's accounts and just sit there if?
So we don't exactly know where that money's going to go. All we know is right now we're paid $1,000 per pupil. So now maybe the balance will go up to 1,200. I don't know, and then we'll get 1,200 per, I don't know what's going to happen, or will they give it to the private schools as well? I don't know. That was just one thing that we happened to notice that says, I said, well, wait a second, we're going to lose this money too.
Right.
Even though it's not in the general fund, we're still going to lose money on that.
Well, there was a couple of bills that I was not familiar with, and as we were talking about the ESA bill, I remembered during the short couple of weeks that the legislature was debating this, and I was talking to parents who, they're engaged parents in the school district, are paying attention to what's happening politically, and really, had a lot of questions for me about understanding the ESA bill, and some, had no idea what was going on. So I really hope that maybe this conversation, like Jill mentioned, does help. That 5% cap on administrative costs, it's not possible, and they know it's not possible. So it's kind of hard to look at this compilation of education reform bills as anything other than an attack on public schools. We are going to create different sets of rules to ensure schools are going to fail or are going to have to make, significant changes. I don't know and that's part of the problem right now is for Council Bluffs, the uncertainty. We have no idea how this is going to impact us, and we won't know until it's too late to make significant changes. But schools across Iowa will close. Class sizes will increase. Teachers will become more and will be demanded to do more and more with less, and it will hurt our kids. That's what's going to happen. And so it's really disappointing, but I do hope that at least this, this conversation might help to engage some more of the parents in our community and other community members who, support what public schools do for thousands and thousands of kids in Council Bluffs.
Chris, you're right. It's an attack on public schools, and it's a way to start privatizing, right? We're already bringing in a company, a private company to manage the different funds, right? That's exactly what it is. And you said it was set up for the schools to fail, set up for public schools to fail. So there's no choice but to be privatized. And it's horrible to see that our state, as long as we were all growing up here, top 10, if not higher, in just our education just dwindle away, and it's heartbreaking to see.
I think the thing to know, though, is it's more important, more incumbent on the private or the public schools to be telling their story, and to be making sure that what's put out in the papers, what's put out to our legislators is an accurate depiction of what we see on a daily basis and how we're impacting kids' lives. Because I think that gets lost in a lot of these, is this assumption that somehow maybe public schools are delivered the same students that the private schools are, and having just wildly different outcomes. And what it is you're taking the very most struggling learners, the struggling students, struggling family members, community members. It's just why we've always had disparities between, those high poverty, high mobility districts and those that have more stable, community stable households. So I think there's an important part there for us just to know that everything that we do every day for our students matters even that much more, and probably to celebrate with our teachers and let them know how much we care through this, that because they'll probably feel the same attack, on what they do every day. And hopefully the community knows what's going on, for real in a district. And I know they like to highlight the big headlines, but I mean, there's so much that's done every day that I think just goes unnoticed.
Well, I agree, and we will continue to bring this back to the board. I understand the strong urge for the ESAs and parent choice and that feeling like the right thing to do. And I would say to whomever would listen, I understand that, but can we at least think it through and work a plan out before we just pass something and we don't know what the details are? Because just as we're hearing about them hiring someone to handle the, how much they're going to give in the ESAs and how that will be distributed and thinking through, I think it leaves us with what I worry about is they don't understand the planning and the budget. So if we staff for 8,800 students and we end up with 82, what then do we do with teachers, staff members? And I've heard from several school districts, so luckily we are not one at this point thinking about this, but they are thinking of closing, and how will they downsize and how will they cut? I think Des Moines said 10 million. I believe Iowa City said 8 million. And as they begin to look at this and how do they balance and how do we handle the unknown, what made Iowa successful is we had deadlines. Deadlines allowed us to plan, and they allowed us, when they removed that, that put us in uncertainty. And that's where I found the world of charter schools coming into public schools and kids being able to bounce back and forth and knowing what that did to the education because they were not getting consistent. They were not using the same, even if they went from one building to another, we had the same resources. And so I think seeing that and knowing how we have to budget and plan, and we build a budget off of how many students, and right now, the historical data that we've always used to plan for kindergarten next year is out the window. And so how do we staff for kindergarten? And so that's when Ms. Ostrowski was talking about building a relationship, so we know what their enrollment looks like and how many come out of our school boundaries, so then we can back it up and try to backward design so that we know where students are, because nothing hurts a student more than you get in 30 days with a teacher and all of a sudden the teacher has to be moved. And then the teacher and the students go, what do you mean? And then they have to start all over. And we went through a pandemic. Students know what it's like to be locked out of education and go into a hybrid and come every other day. And we keep working. And that's the key piece that I think is so hurtful. Is it time to do some things better in education? You bet. Is it time that we can all rally together and think about how to make things better? You bet. But I also know that takes planning and preparation, and it's a big ship we're steering. And right now, we're out in waters, not knowing exactly how we're going to respond to all of this. And so I would say that we'll continue to watch closely, and I have a really smart team. So I know our team will put together a good plan for our board to see, and our parents can know that we'll stay the course. We're going to support our teachers, we're going to support our schools and administrators, and everything good that we have in Council Bluffs, we're going to fight to keep so that our students have an outstanding education and they can achieve more and get into a Diploma Plus pathway and leave with that second credential. We'll stand by that commitment.
Anything else on that? Thank you, Dr. Merlo. Finally, we have a resolution concerning an MOU with the City of Council Bluffs. Is there a motion?
I move that we approve the MOU as presented with the City of Council Bluffs for the pavement requirements along Avenue F at the Early Childhood Learning Center.
Second.
Thank you. There's a motion and a second. Any discussion? I guess we should probably provide a quick explanation of this.
Mr. Myers, you want to provide an explanation on the Avenue F and the changes and why?
Sure, I'd be glad to. Good evening.
Good evening.
Basically, for one, this is a really good thing because we know that Avenue F is in very poor condition. It's not getting any better during the construction. So we've been working with the city for a long time. HGM has helped us quite a bit, but the city had decided a few months ago that they would pursue doing Avenue F. The reason for this MOU is we don't think constructability-wise that it makes sense for the city to be putting in a street and for our contract to be doing the things on the right-of-way. And it's mainly due to the scheduling of those two components. So the city approached us and asked us if we would consider removing the portions of the work that we already had in the right-of-way on both sides, removing that from our current contract with Midwest ECM, and letting them do it and then being reimbursed. So that's basically what we're doing and why.
Is there any type of penalty that we're facing from pulling that part of the project out?
No, probably the only penalty we have is this contract was bid almost a year ago. It was bid with inside of a large project, so the pricing that we will get back may not be as much as what we'll have to pay the city. The good thing is the city is bidding this as a unit price. We know the quantities, and it'll be the lowest responsible bid. So after the bid opening, we'll know what the actual costs are, and we'll only have to reimburse what the actual costs are. Just guessing, I think the engineer's estimate is high. If we use unit prices presented by our contractor, Midwest ECM, and I know they're going to bid it, the prices will be considerably less.
Could you talk about how this may impact our opening of the new learning center?
Sure. We've taken a hard look at the schedule, and originally the city had proposed an August 4th date. I was pushing to get 2 weeks off of that schedule. They were uncomfortable with that because they thought making the schedule a little bit tighter might increase the cost, and that is some valid concern. So we were able to take a week off of it. So it'll be July 28th would be the completion date with a 500-day penalty for the contractor, and then our actual opening day for the new learning center is August 28th. So we have 4 weeks of grace period. Plus, we feel this project will start probably the 1st of May, and realistically 2.5 months should be plenty of time, and we're giving them 3 months to do it.
Any other questions? Thank you. Mr. Wilson, please call the roll.
Mr. Kazire?
Yes.
Mr. Arthur?
Yes.
Ms. Hudak?
Yes.
Ms. Myers?
Yes.
Mr. Peters?
Yes.
Mr. Tripp?
Yes.
Mr. LaFurla?
Yes. And the motion has been approved. We did have an option to return to closed session if needed, and I don't think that is going to be necessary. So that concludes our business, and we are adjourned.